Your check-in would be your name, your branch, and any other one brief thing you want to share. Hopefully not taking more than about a minute. We'll start with Linda.
I'm Linda Lemons. I'm from the Wilf Des Moines branch and really have nothing to share right now. I'll pass it on. I'm in.
I think you're one of the people we have to thank for counting our ballots this last election. So thanks for
Oh,
that, Linda.
yeah. You're welcome.
Then Joan and then Robin.
Oh, hi. I was clapping for Linda rather than waving my hand to speak. But anyway, hi. Joan Goddard from the San Jose, California branch in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I want to move it along also. So thank you.
Glad you're here. Robin and then Gloria.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Robin Lloyd, Burlington, Vermont, Wilf. And unfortunately, I have to leave after a half an hour, but I will be here till then. Thank you.
Great. Gloria and then Lori.
Hi, I'm Gloria McMillan from the Tucson branch, and I have a guest with me. I don't know if you could see this.
Oh, okay.
This is our resilience plant, and I'm challenging every Wilf member to grow one. Something growing from an unlikely start. It's a throwaway ketchup cup, and it is a stump of a celery. And this is a little plant that's growing from it, and I will bring it every so often. So this is your metaphor for coming from a bad start or an unpromising start and resilience.
Beautiful.
Wow.
Thank you.
That is amazing. Thanks. So we now get to hear from Lori and then Dr. Michelle Laws. Lori Jones, you want to check
Hello?
in?
Can you hear me?
Sure.
Oh, okay. I had to get on this is Lori Jones. I'm with the Des Moines branch of Wills.
Great. Any one other thing you want to share with us, Lori?
No, I'm I'm going from webinar to webinar these days.
Well, we're glad to have you, even though you're on the screen
Okay.
twice. It's interesting.
Nice
So,
to be here.
Dr. Michelle and then Cece.
Yes, hi, I'm Michelle Laws from North Carolina. The Triangle Wilf is my branch, although I have been inactive for a while, and got this notification. Glad to be here and love the resilience plant. Good to see some of the faces that I've known and worked with along the way.
Fantastic to have you here, Dr. Michelle. Cece, the other co-chair of AHR, y'all. Cece Anderson, newly elected to the board. Will you check in? Well, Cece may be at work and not in a place where she can speak right now. But if you do get to a place where you want to introduce yourself, Cece, feel free. As I said earlier, I'm George Friday from the Southern Piedmont branch. I'm the program chair on the board, and I'm happy today to be with y'all. Sorry, Teresa's struggling with being evicted and moving into her new place, but her new place is fabulous, so it's going to all be great eventually. We have as our guest today to speak with us, Dr. Linda Ridley. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Dr. Ridley.
Yes, ma'am.
Is, as far as I can tell, looking you up on the Google, Dr. Ridley, is that you are on staff at CUNY, which I think stands for City University of New York. And Dr. Ridley, you're in the New York Wilf branch, correct?
Yes, I'm a brand spanking new member of Wilk. So I haven't even met the branch members yet. Last night was my first attendance.
Wow. Well, glad you're here. And please share with us, you've got 10 minutes for us to hear your presentation. And at 2 minutes, I will come on camera and give you the 2 minutes. And then at 1 minute, I may give you a 1, or you may be done by then. Then you'll have questions from our other members on the call. So I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Ridley.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to join you for your meeting today. I was fortunate to meet Sister Teresa virtually for the first time last night, and I have to pay tribute to her remarkable powers of persuasion. Thank you, Sister George, for sharing the link today. So, my mother was a devoted member of the Order of the Eastern Star, the Osiel Grand Chapter. In fact, her sister, my aunt, who was the matriarch of our family, was a past grand matron for the state of New Jersey, I beg your pardon. So I was raised to be of service to the family and the community. So for my path to come full circle to the UN Decade Reparations is only natural. And as Sister Teresa says, it is meant to be. So to talk a little bit about what I've been doing recently, I can add a little history to bring us to present day and the great work you all are doing on reparations for people of African descent. My background covers over 2 decades of investment banking before entering global consulting and academia, where I design and teach business courses at the graduate and entry level. So after those 25 plus years, I joined husband's consulting firm, and we implement a proprietary management concept that he developed. It's a trademark method known as a symptomatic thought process. He's authored several books on it. Most recently, his anthology known as The Golden Apple, Changing the Structure of Civilization, published by Red Sea Press. So this 5-decade work examines the negative impact of symbols and symbolic behavior on civilization since antiquity. And the work culminates in a solution that replaces symbolic behavior with symptomatic thought and behavior. And to give you an idea, our firm has spent over 20 years in Malaysia, training managers in productivity. We've been designated as expert consultants by the Asian Productivity Organization out of Tokyo, Japan. So as part of my consulting, I then made a foray into teaching, which is something I had not planned on. So as I got into teaching business, I teach organizational behavior and leadership at the graduate level and introductory business and management at the undergrad level. One of the things I noticed was there's a major gap in the pedagogy when teaching students about business and the tenets that begin business. I noticed that we don't mention chattel slavery. And when I use a symptomatic thought process, when I use a symptomal approach to looking at the pedagogy, I saw where the gap was. So I looked at the propensity for business faculty to leave out chattel slavery when they're discussing the dogma that informs business. So to take this a little further, I decided to do a doctorate to penetrate the academy even more. And I did some research looking at the exclusion of chattel slavery in the teaching of business and management, using that symptomatic thought process as my framework. As you know, of course, when you do a dissertation, you have to have a framework you're working within, and I use that. So looking at how can faculty know this information, but yet leave it out when teaching. So I had some really excellent research results because I talked to faculty from all different backgrounds all across the country. And it gave me incredible fodder for my research conclusions. So looking at mythology, how could you know this information, but yet you gloss over it? Any of you who have worked in capitalism or areas or economics areas, you know that there are certain dogma that is always presented, but there's a certain gap that presents itself. And if we're doing work such as looking at reparations, looking at acknowledging discrimination, looking at behaviors that engender racism, then you are naturally drawn to how do I change that behavior? And so working in academia, I'm looking at how can we examine symbols versus symptoms in curriculum development. And that takes me all deeply into areas of myth, symbolic behavior, and superstition, rituals, and my specific research that looks at chattel slavery actually creates a through line from how people were treated during enslavement and how we treat people today. And so the argument is, if you're training managers to be ethical, you have to be using a baseline that is honest and transparent. And so it's been very, very exciting because
Triangle Empowerment Center Incorporated.
so what do we have here? Are we being punked or something? Okay. And so if we look at that mythology of invincibility that we typically have that surrounds business people in a capitalistic society, then we can see that there are many opportunities for changing the behavior, that refusal to face reality. And that is where my research has taken us. I think that when we look at the different examples of how we can improve the experience of business and management students, we look at something like telling them how plantation owners regarded their free labor, which are enslaved workers, as an asset within a capitalist enterprise. That puts a totally different spin on understanding how economics and capitalism works. If we're looking at a true representation of history, we need to be telling business students, and from 1790 to 1820, productivity was nonstop due to efficiencies. But what were those efficiencies? They were obtained from individual enslaved people who worked faster and faster because they were beaten into submission. Those conversations don't take place. And what I found in my research is what we do cover in chattel slavery, we leave it siloed off into courses such as the history of capitalism, or perhaps in some sociology areas. And one of my approaches is encouraging a multidisciplinary environment, an interdisciplinary environment, because as it stands now, the topic of business and management is sacrosanct. You do not bring in discussions around slavery, for heaven's sakes. You barely touch on race. And even when we speak of race, we cloak it in language such as DEI or other so-called non-offensive nomenclature. And as we know now, DEI has become offensive. But the ability to speak plainly about the problems that are facing us is the challenge that we want to attack. And we use a symptomal approach, looking at things as they really are, not adding any accoutrements on top of that. So I come fast forward when we talk about the UN decade and the need for reparations. We're talking about getting rid of symbolic thought. We're talking about changing the mindset to recognize the histories and the legacies of colonialism and enslavement. And symptomatic thought allows that recognition, at that need to eliminate all forms of racial discrimination at the local, national, regional, and global levels. So as I stated earlier, this is my first exposure to your working group, and I think I should stop there, see if I can add any value, if at all, to the team.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Ridley. That was very, very fascinating and encouraging in many ways. We have questions. You can put your hand up. You know how to do that. Down on the bottom of your screen, along the bottom, there's something that says reactions. And you can put your hand up that way, or you can do the old fashioned, your camera on and put your hand up that way too. So we can get questions for Dr. Ridley. I'm going to start with a question, and that is, can you give a definition of, I think you said symbiotic.
Symbols, symbolic
Yes,
symbols, symbolic behavior. Um, long ago, many of you may be familiar with John Dewey. He suggested there's an appreciation that of the impact of symbols in civilization. It's essential that we do that. Most of us don't walk around thinking about symbols or symbolic behavior. Many of us don't even know what it is. So, for instance, when I looked at in my study, I wanted to appreciate that resistance by faculty to include chattel slavery. We had to examine symbols versus symptoms in curriculum development. Another scholar, Edward Whitmont, you might not know him. He was the co-founder of the Carl Jung Institute here in New York. And he posited that humanity is on a symbolic quest. So what Edgar Ridley has found is that symbolism has two significant characteristics: mythology and superstition. And so if we look at that work, Edgar Ridley is a great baseline. Symbolic thought is a learned behavior. It causes people to mythologize and think superstitiously, seeking a secondary meaning instead of an acceptance of facts. And this is all demonstrated by a refusal to face reality. So if we take that definition, we see symbolic thought all day, every day. All day. And so the literature is replete with falsehoods and myths concerning the humanity of enslaved people, for instance, in my work. And so there was a justification for that poor treatment, disenfranchisement, and subsequent exploitation. And so this cutting edge research that I've been exposed to, that I'm exposing to you, it examines the benefit of a symptomatic versus symbolic approach. And that's where we acknowledge reality. Your work in reparations, this is reality. That's a symptomatic approach. We have generations of denying reality, and that allows us to reach our present state. And so if you start looking at digging deep of symbols and symbolic behavior, it takes you into not what? Rituals, superstition, religion. It can get very delicate because we're looking at facing what is in front of us. If we take it, if you look at my research, someone applies for a job, they show up, they're not the right package, they don't get hired, they're not the right gender, they're not the right color. And I don't even want to get into the fact that there's only one race. And we've been drawn into this dialogue of different races, different nationalities, Henry Louis Gates, ancestry. We're all one race. We came from Africa, but we squashed that dialogue. And instead, we have a lot of confusion, and people become very, very bifurcated about it. And so there is a tremendous amount that we have to unpack. I don't know if I answered your question. I gave a lot there.
You gave plenty, and you did answer my question. I have one more. Y'all put your hands up if you have a question as well. And this is just for me trying to really understand what you shared with us. So I heard you say from 1790 to 1820, production was nonstop. And one of my degrees is in economics, and never, not once in any class was there a discussion about the role of enslaved people in creating the wealth of this country, which of course is a direct connection of reparations, and definitely something that with symbolism or whatever you're saying, when people are trying to delude themselves. And as a culture and country, we've done that around a lot of issues related to race that justify the need for reparations. And I just wanted to hear what is the best way to challenge that people will hear and accept. Because the pushback on teaching history and telling the truth about institutional racism and patriarchy is just, people have their heads way under the sand. So any recommendations you have for us?
Well, first of all, I'd be happy to share with you my reference list. When I started doing this research, I was amazed at the amount of what they call extant, EXTANT research that is out there that is simply not included. And one of the appealing elements for me to do the doctorate was to penetrate the academy, because as you say, you start talking about this and they want to shoot you down. Well, you don't know what you're talking about. Where'd you get that from? And so doing a dissertation, which of course forces your hand, I was so pleased to find how much research is out there. The work has already been done. And so the push for us, and I say this to all of my cohort as well, for us educators is to continually insist on bringing in the research that is there, that was not discussed, that was not considered part of the canon. Okay. There is a considerable amount of research that even discusses how there is a canon that you need to work within. And if you don't fit within it, we're not talking about it. We're not including it. And so my response to you is I would give you plenty of research. I've got an awesome, if I may say so myself, reference list that justifies and sanctions and confirms what we're talking about here.
That sounds excellent. Please share it with us, and I can share it with the other people on the AHR
I will.
listserv. Gloria McMillan, I see that you wrote a lot in the chat. I cannot read it all, but if you can ask Dr. Ridley a question in 90 seconds to 2 minutes, go for it.
Okay, I have a background in all this because I'm working with Gary, Indiana, and if you know anything about African Americans, you know what kind of situation Gary, Indiana is in. It's 90% African American. It looks like Chernobyl. It's horrible. It used to be the murder capital of the United States. That was where I went to college. My father was a steel worker, and I'm going back there and doing a lot of work. We have a book coming out, Children of Steel, 20 writers, first fiction book by people from steel mill towns. Well, anyway, to get to the base, parallel to what you're saying, and I agree 100% with everything that you're saying, and I cheer you on. But Milton Friedman also nuked and erased the word worker. Milton Friedman, the great Nobel economics prize winner in macroeconomics, told people, forget FDR, forget the New Deal. Your only responsibilities are to your investors. So what followed was a blessing, like a papal blessing on all of these companies that were industrial, going to other places, going to the South or going overseas. And many of the African-American problems, like in Ferguson, you look them up, you look what used to be their base. What was their tax base? It was an industrial thing that's gone. And so how do we help that? It's not only what was long ago, but this more recent emptying out of all this, the jobs that people came from the South to get in steel was a big one, and auto work, So doesn't that all go together somehow?
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the problems is the need to say things out loud. We're in a space now where we're afraid to acknowledge racism. There's no books on the shelf. We're not teaching. We're making it against the law to read. We are in a race war right now. And so one of the first things we have to do is acknowledge that. And that means for those of us who are fortunate enough to be in front of audiences, inside of NGOs, in positions of authority, we have to name it for what it is. going back to Sister George's observation, none of us learned this. They didn't teach it to us, didn't bring it up. And that makes it invalid. That makes it illegitimate. Well, we can't have that anymore. And so to the extent that we read something, we can't unread it. We need to be going out and doing our research and challenging very much the orthodoxy, because it has gotten us where we are. We don't know what's going to happen in November, but it doesn't look good. So we really need to be committed and strong regarding pushing back. I mean, I don't know if I answered your question, because it requires courage on the part of all of us.
Thanks so much, Dr. Ridley. Courage indeed. We appreciate you being with us today. We invite you to hang out for the rest of our meeting to hear from different cities and states how work towards reparation is going, so people can update us. So we're going to go around and hear from everyone. Let's see. We will start with, how about you, Joan, in California? What's happening with reparations that you can share with us?
Sorry, get the connections going here. I'm very sorry, I don't have anything to report. Our local group, which is a county-wide group, organized and sponsored by the African American Community Services Agency, has not met and recently, and they've been very busy with Martin Luther King Day, etc., of course. And so we're looking forward to having something to report next time. Thank you. I don't know. I don't think Philip is on the call. Philip is from
No, he's not.
the San Francisco area, and there may be something there. And he also does a much better job than I've been able to do so far as what's happening at the state level.
Right.
Thank you.
He's not here with us today. He registered, but he's not here. So, Michelle, you and I are gonna have to get our heads together around North Carolina at some point. I have stuff to share. I'll go last. If you have anything you'd like to share, Michelle, please do.
Thank you, Dr. Ridley, for that presentation. Very, very informative. I got my PhD from a med school, and I can't tell you, when you started talking about the canons and what is considered as valid information and symbols, how apparently absent Black scholars in particular are in the canons, physicians and so forth. In North Carolina, a lot of people know that Asheville led the way in terms of passing reparations policy. However, they are working to actualize that, to actually now move to the next level, which is, what is that going to look like on the ground, and what is, the amounts and all of the how do you computate or quantify reparations? Because I think right now, a lot of the work that I'm aware of in Chapel Hill and also in Carrboro is really symbolic to me. No one has actually come up with a formula of what that will look like. So North Carolina, like I'm sure many Southern states, are still, I think, symbolically responding to reparations, in the fact that acknowledging that it's important, that it is warranted, but moving beyond that, I don't see too much action. There's a lot of forums and discussions. We just had one I was part of in Chapel Hill with Dr. Sandy Darity. I think beyond the educational aspect and the information dissemination aspect of the discussion related to reparations, there isn't much action that's translating into real reparations.
Mhm.
And may I say one thing about symbols in this time? I think Donald Trump masterfully understands symbols. When I think of symbols, I think of codes, code language, right? We talk about code switching, and in particularly among the BIPOC communities, how important it is if you're navigating spaces that are led by white males or patriarchal systems, hegemonic systems that have been dismissive of your voice. And you, once you get into those spaces, how important it is to be able to code switch, right? To come across as less threatening. Donald Trump is a master at using codes and symbols to incite and to tap into the deepest fears and even in some instances hatred of certain of the other. So fear of the other, but also just disdain towards the other. I think that is in the way he has used words and language and codes has been, masterful. And it has been masterful because we've seen those that have responded to those codes. So thank you for your work, your scholarship, and your presentation today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. I'll check in last, and I have a little bit to add about Asheville and the North Carolina when I get my chance. But let's now hear from Linda Lemons, and then, hold on, I've forgotten the other people. I don't know everybody's name. Lori Jones, that's what I was thinking of. So Linda and Lori after Linda. You're muted, Linda. We can't hear you. Clearly you're talking, but.
Thank you a lot. Thank you, George, for making me aware of that. Thank you, Dr. Ridley, for your presentation. I'm finding this whole conversation very thought-provoking. I am not clear what our WILF group is really doing towards reparations. It feels like we're trying to do more resistance and advocacy for environmental justice is a big issue in Des Moines. I think I'm very fascinated by reparations. I think I come to it more, am in challenge more from my religious community, which is Unitarian Universalism. That's part of what we hope to do. And I'm challenged as to how we do it that's impactful. So I'm glad to be here as part of the conversation to learn. Thank you. Lori, do you have thoughts about our branch that you'd like to add?
Or your state. I don't know that much
hello,
about Iowa.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Well, I'm really thrilled to be here, and I'm sure that I can speak for everybody that I'm so happy that you spoke with us today, Doctor. And I would love to read your thesis. But anyway, and possibly you've written, or you are planning to write a book.
I have written several papers and a case study, and yes, I'm working with a publisher as we speak.
Very good. Well, I'll look forward to it. I'll look for it. And
Okay.
I can't really say anything about the Des Moines branch right now as far as reparations. I would go along with Linda, but I'll pass this on to somebody else. Thank you.
One of those times, George, when we say, you're muted. Maybe you need to be.
Stepped away.
Hello? Still there?
We're waiting for George to call on the next person unless somebody wants to take the initiative to go ahead.
Y'all, I have just been sitting here talking to a muted self. That is really embarrassing and silly.
Guess what? You're like the rest of us.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. Cece, are you in a position where you can talk to us about Atlanta or Georgia and reparations? Or here, let us know if and when, Cece, you can share. For my part, to finish or to share more about North Carolina behind Dr. Michelle is I was employed by the Bill of Rights Defense Committee in 2013 to about 2018. And one of the things that was my honor and pleasure is helping with Asheville's reparations work. So, Dr. Laws, we had a lot of educational forums, and from that, then created a draft policy that we then got, what's the word? Champions on the city council and county commission to back, and then it was presented and passed. When we were doing that work, people were identifying the way, what the reparations would look like, not quantifying exactly, but saying, well, we want money for businesses, money for housing, support for schools, and community and family support. So those were identified, but no recommendations were made around anything else that would be quantifying those numbers. So I wanted to share that. And to the degree that we can in the Southern Piedmont, we want to follow that model, beginning with educational forums this year, either in the next few months or before May. And we've put that out as our goals for the branch here, but we haven't gone beyond that, starting doing education. And that education would be focused on what is the history of contributions from Black folks in this geographic area, in the Southern Piedmont? What are the ways that unrecognized benefit have been created where the cause and the catalyst was the work and value, principle, and energy of Black folks that have never gotten any acknowledgement for that. And then, that makes steps to make the case. Do you have any recommendations, Dr. Linda? I can see your face. You're thinking, well, I don't know. We have some time. I'd love to hear any recommendations you have for those of us working to get reparations legislation in our towns or states.
That question was for me?
Yes, ma'am, if you have a response.
Well, just listening to you, I was thinking you're going in the right direction with education, because the challenge is for people to be first aware of what was missing. As you mentioned earlier, you did a whole degree, but they didn't teach you certain things. And we are fast forward now. We don't know what people have offered. And we hear more often than not, that African Americans didn't contribute anything to this country, didn't do anything. And how are people having the gall to say those things unless there's no education taking place? So I think you're going in the right direction, looking at the unrecognized benefit of contributions. I can't add to that other than stay the course.
Thank you. Okay. Well, y'all, it looks like we may end before an hour. We usually don't take longer than that, but I appreciate everyone being here and everything that you shared. We'll meet next month. Let's look and see what date it will be next month so I can let y'all know that. Okay. Sorry, I'm not very fast.
Please give Sister Teresa my best wishes. That's
That's
terrible.
exactly what I was going to say, Dr.
Absolutely. Absolutely
Should we
will.
call you Dr. Ridley or should we call you Linda?
Linda is absolutely
Um,
fine.
Thank you. Looking forward to future ongoing. Now maybe George
Right.
is ready.
Thank
I
you.
think February 15th is the next UN Decade Reparations Zoom, same time. And of course, look for a notice to register and get the Zoom link and start everything.
Let me
Take
say,
care. Thank you so much for today.
I put my references out there if anybody wants to pull them down.
Great. So that's in the chat. I will send the recording and the chat out later today or early tomorrow, depending on how long it takes to process the
Thank
recording.
you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Goodbye.
you. Thank you.
Sure. Okay.